Yo, what's going on, you guys? It's your boy 360 Stacks and this thing, baby, representing TKOG. Super happy. I'm actually off today, and you guys, I am not gonna lie. This new job has definitely, it's changed my schedule. Like, dude, it's kind of tough. Like, I want to upload more, but there'll just be days where I'll just be like, bro, I'm just about to go to sleep. I don't want to do nothing. I don't want to go nowhere. Like, it's pretty tough. I'm not gonna lie. Obviously, like I need to upload more, you know, and it got to a point where I literally just told my boss, I was like, these are the days I need to be scheduled, and these are the days that I need off. Cause like I really still want to do stuff, outside of work, and not just like rest up on an off day just to get ready to go back in. I don't want that to be my life. I don't. And then on top of that, like, I still got to make sure I make time for my Patreons. I got to make time for my wife. I got to make time for my kids. I got to make time for myself. Got to make time for church. Dude, it's just, so much going on all the time, every week. But I will be having a lot more content coming. I'm just going to probably like binge on it today so that I have so many videos pre-prepared that I can just upload them throughout the week. I really should have done that, but I ain't gonna lie, bro. Like, I've been being pretty lazy on off days. Like, I've just been like, dude, I don't want to do anything or go anywhere. I don't even want to make a video. Like, it's really like that. Like, my body be hurting. I'll be tired. It's literally 12 hours, 12-hour shifts. But anyways, not complaining. I'm still blessed. So today I decided to talk to you guys about the state of Yu-Gi-Oh! How I feel about it. I lined up a lot of archetypes. There's still more, but these are what I've noticed, and these are what I feel you're going to run into more often than not, and these are considered to be like the best decks right now. I will say there's a lot of rogue decks that I feel could easily be in here, but as you guys can see, I literally ran out of room. And then I was like, dang, maybe I should just put less cards to represent the archetype so I can make more room. And before you know it, I was like, dang, I ran out of room again. But if you guys have not done so already, please subscribe to my channel. Also, like it if you like it, and comment. Let me know how you feel, bro. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm all ears, and I'm always open for suggestions. If you have not done so already, there's also multiple ways that you can support my channel. Between buying my merchandise, becoming a member of my Discord, which is 100,000% free. You can also donate to me through Patreon or PayPal. And all these things go a long way. Trust and believe when I say it really does help a lot, and I do appreciate it. And I do give back to those who give to me. So let's get started. So the current state of Yu-Gi-Oh! I feel it's very diverse. I know a lot of people in a lot of formats, they always complain, dude. Like, there's always a problem for a lot of people. Like, every single format, there's obviously going to be the best decks that are highly represented, and to be honest, you see them more often than not, and sometimes people get tired of seeing those same decks. I understand that. Now, do I think that, like, that's just going to totally make or break it for me to where I don't want to play the game? Never. Do I feel like there should be emergency ban lists? Hardly ever. Like, I personally, if I worked for Konami, I'd never make an emergency ban list, and a lot of cards that are currently banned, I wouldn't have banned them. I would have actually designed cards. Konami has done this pretty frequently, but they should do it more often. I would actually design cards that were actually made with the sole purpose of being a hard counter to some of these archetypes. Like, and it is the case sometimes. There are some archetypes that are just so inherently powerful against another archetype that it's a favorable matchup. So even though that deck might not be meta per se, that deck ends up becoming meta for the simple fact that it is a hard counter to the deck that is currently being played that people consider to be the best deck. Examples would be when you're in a Dragon Ruler format and you're running Necro Valley. Gravekeepers are a perfect example because Gravekeepers are an archetype that hard counter decks like Drivetrons. They hard counter decks like Shaddolls. Shaddolls can struggle against Necro Valley. Tri-Brigades can struggle against Necro Valley. Drytrons, Dinosaurs. Heck, more than half the decks that I'm showing on this list can get clapped just by Necro Valley. And Gravekeepers is not the only archetype that's like that. Konami has printed and released quite a few archetypes that have a gimmick that seems to only work against certain decks. So they will have their time, but then at the same time, they're not generic from the standpoint of just being a good deck on their own. Their gimmick is what makes them good, in the sense that they have a specific kind of playstyle that they're going to be good against, and outside of that, they're very average. And I like those kind of decks. I am a very anti-meta oriented player. I tend to not play the deck that everyone else is playing, for the simple fact that I A, hate mirror matches, and B, I also dislike playing the same deck as everybody. And I also dislike when I'm playing a deck and it's rogue and it's not meta, and then all of a sudden overnight it becomes popular and people start playing the deck that I was playing. That also really is one of my gripes. So, like, these are all just my thoughts. Like I said, this is how I feel about the current format. It's very diverse. I feel that it's very healthy. There's a lot of variety going on here. There's so many decks that can easily clap anybody, and I like it. I honestly do. I like it. I feel like it's balanced. A lot of people disagree with me, but at the same time, I'm the type of Yu-Gi-Oh player that instead of complaining like a big baby and saying we need a ban list, I'd rather find a way to hard counter all these decks. I'd rather look for a deck. I'd rather find some kind of anti-meta strategy, or also I'd really just change my hand trap lineup. I'd change my tech card lineup. I'd change my side deck. I will adapt before I complain. I will adjust before I whine. Like, I'm just not like that, dude. Like, I love this game. It's super fun. It's one of the best games in the world. It's very, very addicting. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes you gotta take a break just so that you can actually enjoy your life and not have your life like literally all about Yu-Gi-Oh. But I will say, like, how I feel about the format right now, I love it, dude. Honestly, this is one of the best formats ever. So I'm just going to pop in with these decks real quick, and I'll just drop the current decks that I feel are the best decks. Feel free to disagree with me. No hurt feelings here. Just make sure that when you disagree that you're respectful with your decisions. You're respectful, obviously, with your counter arguments. Make sure you provide a counter argument. I should have started with that. Make sure you provide a counter argument. Make sure you're respectful about it, and give good reasoning, you know, if you disagree with me. If not, then no one's trying to hear it. So here's Tri Brigades. Tri Brigades is obviously one of the best decks. It's super duper high rated. Like, honestly, this deck is all over the place. Like, I'll talk to you about how I feel about this deck, because I think this deck is not as great as people make it seem, but also at the same time, I do understand the mid-range simplistic playstyle. This is not a hard deck to play at all, and because it has such a high conversion rate in a lot of top tier events, and it's just, you know, such a great deck. It's very well rounded, it's pretty resilient, and it's good at what it does. I think that's one of the main reasons why a lot of people play this. Is this the best deck? Heck no, absolutely not. It's just very, very popular, dude. But there are way better decks, way more skillful, that have a higher reward and a higher payout for playing them. Next, you know what? Let me check this. I need to make sure. Okay, I can see these frequencies right here, the sound. So I know my mic is still working. Because last time I recorded on my laptop, the mic literally blew out in the middle of the video, and I had to delete the video, take it off YouTube, and re-upload it. Next up, we've got Drivetrons. Drivetrons is honestly one of the best decks. It's hard to say which one is the best deck, because any deck on this list could easily be the best, and it will fluctuate a lot. That's another thing with this format, and formats like it in the past. Like, in the early season, people will be like, oh yeah, this is the best deck, and then all of a sudden nothing changes, right? But the only thing that'll change is, like, people start playing a deck more, which means it just becomes more popular, and all of a sudden they're like, oh no, this is the best deck. And you'll see this time and time again. It'll always happen like that. So people will be like, Tri Brigade's the best deck. People will be like, Drivetron's the best deck. Heck, people still say Dragon Link is the best deck. People say Virtual is the best deck. Like, I don't know what the best deck is, but I know that all these decks can take the cake, bro. Like, any of these decks could easily take that title. I just feel like these are the best decks. That's what I'll say to really simplify, just to really simplify this video, because I don't want to get a lot of backlash for saying a deck's the best and it's not, and, you know, hurt people's feelings to be like, oh, I thought this was. But Drivetrons is a really strong deck. What I love about this deck is that it's very ritual oriented. It's very, very ritual oriented. I love blue cards, if you guys didn't know. Ritual summoning is my favorite mechanic. It was the most underrepresented mechanic. It got the least amount of love for a long time until Drivetrons and also Incantations came out. It really changed the game. Concerning Tri Brigades, I'll touch back on it. Matter of fact, I might as well just talk about them as I go so that I can just get through it. So, I feel like Tri Brigades, their biggest choke points is, like, A, they need their normal summon to go through, and if their normal summon cannot go through, they need to resolve Keraz. So when you really think about it, 2 hand traps or 2 disruptions, 2 compulsory evacuation devices, 1 Book of Moon plus 1 Forbidden Chalice. 2 very simplified interruptions that don't have to be big, don't have to be crazy, can end this deck's turn. Lancia is really strong against this deck. Effect Veiler is really powerful. Cards that aren't good against this deck, I feel, are going to be cards like Ash Blossom, Ghost Ogre. Ghost Spell is only good when they do not end on Appaloosa. Other than that, you're trying to Ghost Spell a Revolt and they have an Opal on the field and it's just not going to work out for you. So do I feel like Ghost Spell is good? It's only strong when you can back it up with another hand trap to make sure that they're not ending on Appaloosa. If they are ending on Appaloosa, you cannot Ghost Spell their Revolt. It's just how it is. People say Ghost Spell is good against Tri-Brigades, but what they don't understand is they're taking it out of context in the sense that it's not good by itself. So when you're running Ghost Spell, every time you draw it against this deck, if it's the only hand trap you have, you're not going to win. Or at least you're not going to stop them from resolving Revolt on your turn using Appaloosa and also using double Dragon Lords to bounce one of your cards. This deck's inboard is not very impressive. I'm not impressed by it, but because it's so consistent and it's very, very like rinse, wash, and repeat, you can do the same thing over and over. You're always going to get follow-ups. Your inboard gives you your follow-ups. The deck can play through interruptions pretty well with the solid hand. I'm not going to lie. I've seen it happen. But there are specific interruptions that absolutely destroy this deck. I mentioned Compose for a reason. I'm not saying everybody's playing it, but cards that are like that. It could be Chuchi in the Virtual World matchup. It could be Dogmatic the Punishment. It could be Conquistador. It could be Battle Butler. It could be Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. It could be Orange Light. I mean, every deck in this list has something that would actually, like, destroy this deck's first turn. Like, if you have the correct setup, it really would take, I'd say, max 3 interruptions. Like, this deck is not going to play through 3 solid interruptions. It's pretty difficult. But I think it's more like, because this deck is so easy to play, it's very mainstream, it's got good results to back it up. I'm never going to say the deck's bad. I just think the deck is not as great as people like make it out to be. I've played the deck. I know how it works. I understand the ins and outs. I know the weaknesses and the choke points. I know that this deck is not the best deck. I just know. You can disagree with me. It's totally fine. But this is not the best deck. This deck it has better results for the simple fact that it has a higher representation. And I've went in on that on a lot of my videos. I've explained to people how the quote-quote best deck actually works in Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot of the times representation is a huge dictating factor, because representation actually goes hand in hand with results. Because if there's a YCS and it's a 500-man YCS, if 480 people were playing Battery Mans, how do you think that's going to work on the conversion rate? Battery Mans is going to top that YCS. It's the same thing with Tri-Brigade. If 40% of the playing field is Tri-Brigade, there's a very high chance that Tri-Brigade is going to top that event. Even if they're not great players, even if they're just average and just know the bare minimum on how to play the deck, it's just unfortunate that that's how it's going to work. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very RNG-based game. You don't have control over what you're going to draw. So decks that have access to multiple copies of the same card have a higher chance of opening their starters. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of these decks made it, in my opinion, are the best decks of the format, because they have the consistency factor that's necessary. Consistency, representation, results, and I also want to say matchups, because some decks on this list hard counter others extremely well. But yeah, Tri-Brigade's pretty solid. I'm not going to take the cake away from them. They're pretty solid. I won't hate on them. Drivetrons I think is amazing. This deck is disgusting. It's absolutely horrifying to get paired up against this deck without like a Dark Ruler or Droplets or Droll and Lockbird. It's really hard to hand trap this deck with simplified, like I would say, like 1-for-1 hand traps, like when you're trying to systematically end their turn with Ashes and Veilers and Imperms. Even if they're well timed and used on the correct card, this deck just has so many starters. It has so many ways to play through those hand traps, to play around the hand traps. It has main deck outs to Droll and Lockbirds that you can literally just hard draw. It's got, heck, I play Talents in my list. You can play Herald of the Orange Light at 3. Some people don't play Herald. I feel like every list should have this card. This is a main deck out to Droll. Called by the Grave is a main deck out to Droll. Instant Fusion's a main deck out to Droll. Talents, if you get Drolled, you can actually just rip your opponent's starter from their hand, and you can wall up with something like the rank 1 bird. It's like Kagamusha or whatever. It's like totally indestructible, unaffected by card effects, cannot be killed by battle when you activate its effect. It's going to buy you a turn, and you're going to be able to rip a card out of your opponent's hand. There's so many ways that this deck can play around the quote-unquote end-all be-all against this deck. A lot of people say Droll kills this deck, but good Drivetron players can easily play through it or around it. And outside of Droll, having Dark Ruler is pretty solid, but it's like this deck is going to have Herald. It's going to have Gammas in its hand. This deck is really powerful. Like, if anybody was going to ask me, in my unbiased opinion, it's not because I love Rituals, but it's because I just believe this deck really is that strong. I would say, like, Drytron, Dragon Link, and Shaddolls are honestly the best decks on this list. That's just my opinion. You feel free to disagree if you want to. But this deck is just very resilient. It has a super OP grind game. It's very consistent. It's got everything. You know, it's got starters, it's got extenders, it's got recovery and follow-up. It's got critical mass. It can play through hand traps. It can make a board and break a board just as easily. It also has main deck outs to the cards that specifically hard counter it. So it's a very, very powerful deck. Herald of Ultimateness and Herald of Perfection are not a joke. They can build chain links on themselves, and unless you have something like a Kaiju or a Dark Ruler or Droplets, there's really no point in even just wasting your resources to bait these negates, because Eva exists and it really puts this deck over the top. Next up, we will talk about Oviraptor, the deck. Oviraptor, the deck. I mean, we can call it Dinos, but like I look at this deck as like the Oviraptor deck. Like, this card single-handedly takes this deck to another level. If this card was never printed, Dinos would just not be a thing. They just wouldn't be as great as they are. So, the cards that really push this archetype over the top are these three right here. Oviraptor, Miscellaneousaurus, and Scrap Raptor. These cards are insane. All of these cards are broken in their own right. These cards, I don't think that it's necessarily, I wouldn't say they should not have been printed, but I just think, like, Konami, you knew what you were doing when you printed these cards. You knew that you would make this deck busted. This deck is an absolute nightmare. Even with Misk at 1, Misk was at 1 once upon a time, and the deck was clapping everybody's cheeks, bruh. Like, this deck was absolutely destroying people. I mean, it was clapping kids going second. You'd make it go first because you thought it was a going second deck. They'd be ending on Doka, UCT, Chlamydia. Now they're ending on Oppo, Borreload Savage, UCT, sometimes even Abyss Dweller. It is retarded. I'm sorry, I can't use that word. It is absolutely nuts what this deck is capable of doing, going first and going second. It's extremely resilient. Miss being at 1 does not kill the deck. It's not dead. It's not dead. I don't care what people say. People act like when something gets hit on a deck, it's dead. Like Sky Strikers with no engage was never dead. Sky Strikers with 1 multi-roll was never dead. Sky Strikers when Widow Anchor went to what? 1 or 2. Never dead. The deck's just insane. Like, some decks are just that good that you have to hit them on the ban list multiple times just to lower their power level, just so that they can scale more properly against other decks. And really, what makes these top 3 decks so amazing is they have those really, really good factors that make a deck a very, very viable contender. When a deck's got good sustain, when a deck's got good critical mass, when a deck is actually able to play through multiple interruptions, as long as you're able to play through 2 and above, you're solid. If you're folding to 2 interruptions, I'm sorry, your deck is average. It's average. Like, there are decks with much higher ceilings than these, but at the same time, their ceiling just comes from their end results. But the way they get to it is very, very, very fragile. It's easy to interrupt, and a lot of times it's prone to just one hand trap. So even though there are rogue decks that can FTK you, they can summon the Last Warrior from another planet, they can summon in Phoenixes and FTK you and burn you to death. It's like these decks are not as resilient and consistent as the ones I'm talking about. So yeah, Dinos are pretty crazy. UCT is still at 3, and this card, it blows my mind how good this card is. This card single-handedly will keep this deck at the forefront at all times because of this card's existence. My nose is kind of getting stuffy. So, next up, I'm going to talk about Print Kids. I'm going to check my timer here. Alright, we're solid. Next up, I'm going to talk about Print Kids. So, Print Kids is one of my favorite decks. I've actually been playing this deck for about 4 years now. Actually, I would say 3 years. 3 years. Pushing. It's just like, it's over 3 years. It's not 4 years, though, for sure. I've basically been playing this deck since it came out. We used to play it with Poly and 2 Pranks. We were running Invocation, Fusion Recycling Plant, Planet Pathfinder to search Fusion Recycling Plant or place. Fortunately, now this deck has a higher comfort zone, and it can easily fit in some of the most crazy tech cards you've ever seen in your life. This deck is very reminiscent of Zodiac and Sky Strikers in the sense that its engine's super compact, it doesn't need a lot to get going, and it makes it super flexible in the terms of deck building. The composition of your main deck can be so unorthodox, it's ridiculous. How many hand traps you can play, how many flex cards you can play, how easy it is to side deck with this deck. This deck is so amazing. It's an absolute powerhouse. It's consistent. It's got draw power, search power, recursion through the wazoo. This deck shines and excels in the recovery aspect. It's just such a good deck. It's crazy how out of control it can get in just one turn. This deck can put people so far behind in card advantage and resources. The economics of this deck are just ridiculous. Trinkets are such a powerful deck. They are very, very prone to interruptions, but a good Trinkets player can easily circumvent those issues just in the deck building process alone. I've said this so many times and I'll say it again. If you know that your deck is susceptible to cards that people are playing and you know that people are going to be playing those cards, why would you not main deck cards to help you and assist you with combating those cards? This is why I play so many extenders in my Trinkets list. It really grinds my gears when I'm seeing Trinkets list with like 15 hand traps, a couple floodgates, like there can be only one in skill drain, and they're rocking cards like Solemn Strike, and they're literally dying to an Ash Blossom or a Gamma, and they're solely relying on their defensive cards like their hand traps and their traps to carry them into the next turn and praying to God that their opponent didn't have a second Ash Blossom. I feel personally that mentality goes into every single one of these decks. If you're playing Tri Brigades and you know that your deck struggles with your normal summon being a choke point and needing Keras to get you out of that choke point, you don't want to rely solely on Keras because you might draw a hand that can't search them. You know, it just happens. Like, if you're playing Drivetrons and you know that Drone Lockbird can sometimes really screw you over, why would you not play cards in your main deck to counter that card? If you're playing Dinosaurs and you know Lancia can really destroy your deck, why would you not play cards to counter that card? Same thing with Trinkets. You know Ash Blossom, Skullmeister, and Gamma are really good against your deck. Why would you not main deck cards that'll assist you? So, in my mind, when I know my deck's weakness, I play around it as if my opponent has it in their hand 100% of the time. I'm a very cautious player. You know, this is just how I am. I can be a bit over-analytical at times. That's good and bad. Over-analytical in the sense that I play scenarios out in my head before I actually do it. That goes in hand with me in real life too. I'll play out conversations in my head before I have them. Sometimes I just don't even want to talk to people because it's like in my head I've played this out already and I know where it's going to go. That's why I also am, sometimes I'm just super passive and I don't really go into debates with people. I don't really argue with them or disagree with them. I just let them have it, you know. It's a good thing, but also it can be bad because over analyzing situations will really cause you to lead it to assumptions that aren't really there, so you will be assuming, and assuming is pretty dangerous. But also at the same time, it's very, very good when it comes to deck building. Being analytical is really, really good because when I'm building my decks, especially Prank Kids, this is one of the unique decks that I have a specific playstyle approaching this deck. In my head, I play out scenarios where, like, what if they have Ash and Gamma and Skullmeister? What can I do? So then that's when I'm changing the composition of my main deck. So I feel if you have an approach like that, you will be an amazing Prank Kid player because this deck is so powerful. It's actually obnoxious how good it is. People hate this deck. This deck plays Mystic Mind. This deck plays all the good hand traps. This deck can play Floodgates. This deck is so easy to side deck with. It's just absolutely amazing. It really is. You've got... Oh, you know what? I really should have mentioned I dropped down the extra deck cards for Tri Brigade and also for Drivetrons just to help to explain them further. And now I'm going to have to kind of just skim and get to Prank Kids. But yeah, when I talked about Tri Brigades, I should have mentioned their links because honestly, all their links are amazing. Like Shurag is one of their main disruptions, and also it just keeps pressure on people. Bear Bloom really put this deck over the top, I'm not gonna lie. It's insane being able to search Revolt. This card is just gross. Drivetrons, I really forgot to mention the fact that Moonbaiter Fafnir exists, because this card really took this deck to a whole nother level, as well as being able to hard Synchro Summon for Arclight thanks to Diviner, and having access to Elder for more pressure going second, and Dinos just having some of their staple XYZs. I mean, they can make Dweller and Baguska, but the fact that Lagia and Doka are walking like Gamma and, you know, pretty much Solemn Warning / Solemn Judgment are just insane. Prank Kids have their utility. Their toolbox is amazing. They have access to a double Raigeki on legs. They have access to a double Feather Duster on legs. And such insane recovery that, like I said, they will put you so far behind just in sheer card economy alone that it's really hard to deal with this deck. It's obnoxious. Prank Kids are really solid. Next, I'm going to talk about Dragon Link. This deck is still one of the best decks. This deck can easily be the best deck. I just don't get people. People really act like if something gets hit on a deck that it's just dead. And then you literally see Dragon Link all over the place. And they're like, oh, my bad. Dragon Link's still the best deck. And it's like, nah, fam. It's not the best deck. Just don't read too far into it. It's just a really, really good deck. It's super powerful. It's amazing. Like, losing LP and losing a couple copies of Striker Dragon, sure, the ceiling's a bit lower. If you want that same power and consistency, you will have to put a couple cards in your deck that are not favorable to draw. It's totally fine, or you can play the deck as is. It's just that powerful that it can get hit multiple times and still be good. It's very much so like Sky Strikers in the sense that it's just not gonna die, dude. This deck's just so powerful. Dragon Link is obnoxious. The interruptions it can put up, the interruptions it can play through, the level of recovery and follow-up resources that you get, the amount of cards that you can take away from your opponent in the process. This deck is just very, very scary. It's very obnoxious. I mean, now that I'm remembering and reminding myself to bring up the extra deck cards, the staples that this deck has access to: Borreload Savage, Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, Heretic Seal of Heavenly Spheres, Appaloosa, the Bow of the Goddesses, Zombie Stein, Sky Prison. I mean, this deck can make all of those cards, and these are really, really powerful cards. Like, this deck has haymakers through haymakers, boss monster after boss monster. It's just such a powerful deck. Dragon Link is insane. I think Dragon Maids are a much better deck, and I would have put them on this list if I didn't get, so much backlash from it. I think Dragon Maids are a lot better, but at the same time, what Dragon Link is it's not an archetype. It is actually a compilation, rather a conglomeracy of just random dragon cards that have such a great synergy and cohesiveness between each other that it just makes a really solid meta mash deck. It's a monster mash deck. It's just full of really good cards, and that's what makes the deck work. It has crazy extenders, crazy starters. It can play through so many hand traps, it's ridiculous. You would think that Droll would kill this deck. You would think that Lancia would kill this deck. You would think that Nibiru would kill this deck, but it can play through them all. Dragon Maid Tiding is still just such an amazing staple in all dragon decks. Heretic Seals is so powerful. Tidying and Seals alone is good enough to counter Tri-Brigades. Depending on what seal target you're playing, you can literally end Drivetron's turn. It can still absolutely clap Prank Kid's cheeks, I'm not gonna lie. Dragon Link is just so good, you guys. I know people hate the fact that it's just not going anywhere. I know people complain and whine like big babies, grown men. But dude, like, this deck is just not going anywhere. Dragon Link is absolutely disgusting. I mean, this deck is still putting up boards that a lot of these decks fold to. Like, putting up Sky Prison against Drivetrons is nutty. It's just putting up Heretic Seals and Tidying is nutty against Tri-Brigade and Prank Kids, against Virtual World, against Eldritch, against Attic Nister, dude. Like, it's just 2 bounces goes a long way. It's also a really solid way to play around Shaddoll Fusion against, Shaddolls. It's just, this deck's insane, you guys. It really is. It's a very, very scary deck. Even without LP and with one Striker Dragon, this deck is absolutely clapping people's cheeks into oblivion. It's just so good. Next up, Shaddolls. So Shaddolls is one of my favorite decks. So of course I'm a bit biased in the sense that I think this deck is better than other people think it is. That's just my opinion though. But I know that this deck is incredible. I know this deck is amazing. It has one of the best toolboxes in the game. I mean, this deck boasts such a resilient and such a versatile toolkit. This deck is, I consider it to be a jack of all trades. I mean, honestly, some of these decks can only do one thing, and they do it so well, that's what keeps them in the forefront. But Shaddolls are just such an amazing toolbox deck. I mean, you need a negated card, Op Cologne, genius. You need a special summon something, you've got Windy. You need a draw card, you've got Beast. You need access to any Shaddol you need, you've got Hedgehog. Like, you need to shut your opponent down, you've got Winda. You need a negate, you've got Shiki Naga and Op Cologne again. I mean, dude, you need to search a Shaddol card under Droll and Lockbird, send it off of Construct or Squirmata, and add it from your grave to your hand. You're playing under Droll. I mean, this deck just, it's so amazing. You have access to a triple DD Crow. You have access to the utility that Squirmata and Construct and Windy offer you, you have so much advantage that it snowballs out of control. You have a plethora of starters. You have resiliency because it's really Dogmatica Invoke Shaddolls that makes such a great combination and just really makes it a tier 1 deck in my opinion. That you've got, like, with these 3 archetypes, each one of them struggles against specific hand traps, but because one hand trap doesn't kill the entire deck, it gives it that resiliency that you really need. Droll might hurt the invoked and Dogmatica aspect, but Shaddolls don't care about Droll. While at the same time, cards that specifically are meant to counter Shaddolls, like DD Crow and Skullmeister, might not be as effective against this other portion of the deck. It's just so powerful. Shaddol Fusion can single-handedly crack a Tri-Brigade board by itself. If you're summoning Op Cologne and you're sending Nephesh Shaddol Genius as one of the materials, you can chain block, set Op Cologne and Genius as the lower chain links to negate double Dragon Lords, and you can negate Apollousa, while at the same time you'll be forcing out Revolt, because in all honesty, you can really set it up like this. You can send Dragon and you can send Genius to summon Op Cologne. Like, if you have Meltdown, it's over because they can't respond. So, like, if they did not negate Meltdown or they just let it resolve and you activate Shaddol Fusion, you can send Genius and Dragon to summon Op Cologne. You can literally pop their Revolt, negate their Apollousa, and negate their Dragon Lords, and they can't even respond. And then add yourself a Schism for your troubles. It is absolutely bonkers. This deck is insane. If you're playing against Virtual Worlds and they're setting up, you know, Crystal Wing, Shinshin, and Chuche, which is a very common board, Shaddol Fusion, summon Op Cologne, send Dragon, send Genius, the same scenario, summon Op Cologne, and you're literally going to be forcing out their whole field. So you can put Genius as the highest chain link to force out the Crystal Wing, Op Cologne as the second chain link, target the Shinshin to negate it, and then Dragon as the third chain link to target the Chuchi and pop it. You're going to force out their whole board with one Shaddol Fusion. I can name a dozen scenarios where one Shaddol Fusion absolutely breaks entire established boards. This deck is not a joke, and I really don't want it to be meta. I don't want people to go back to this deck. Like, right now it's not popular. Everybody's just flocking to other decks. Good. You were never real Shaddol players in the first place. A true Shaddol player will play this deck no matter what people say about it, and it's just the truth. It is one of the best decks ever made. It is one of the best decks of all time. It is goated. Like, Herald is goated. Drivetrons and Shaddolls are GOAT decks. These decks are absolutely monsters. And on top of that, these decks do not really struggle with the cards that people think that they struggle against. Like, honestly, people think that, like, Schism is the only way to play Shaddolls. So people think Cosmic Cyclone and Ghost Spell are so good against this deck. But you have good Shaddol players that are actually playing El Shaddol Fusion and Shaddol Core, which enables them to play through cards like Gamma, Ghost Spell, Cosmic Cyclone, Twin Twisters a lot more effectively. I can go on. I mean, Alistair is literally the man. This guy will force Crystal Wings by himself. This guy will force interruptions by himself. This man will single-handedly force a revolt. Like, if you've hand-trapped a Tri-Brigade player and simplified the game state to the point where they can only search revolt and resolve it, a smart player might actually play around the fact that you have a trap card in your hand, and they will literally revolt your Alistair. On top of that, they're going to revolt your Alistair anyways because they don't want Invocation to actually get online. And, you know, you obviously have, like, the Saki plays where, like, Alistair gets Ash and you have Invocation. They revolt to banish your Alistair and you had a second copy. So it's just super resilient. It's crazy. And all of your engines replace themselves. Your Dogmatica cards replace themselves. Alistair always gives himself back. And Shaddolls just grind every deck to oblivion. Next up, I mean, I can keep talking, but honestly, like, this deck is just so gross. It's so gross. It's just like, bro, people don't even want to play against this deck. They just don't. Like, they call it the Winda Dot deck, but it's so much more. It's so much more, dude. They're not even scratching the surface if they think Winda is all this deck has to offer. So next up, I'm going to bring up Adignisters. I am not going to lie. I really don't know much about this deck at all. I have never played Adignisters. I've seen it played. I know that it can end on the towers. And it also can end on some really nutty follow-ups and easy leads into an access code OTK on the next turn. I know that it's super resilient. It can play through a plethora of hand traps. I know that it also gets clapped by Droll like some of the other decks on this list. I think this deck gets clapped by Droll a bit harder because it doesn't have inherent counters to it like Dinosaurs can get drolled and they'll still have Lost World and Scrap Raptor. That's actually a thing. Drivetrons literally have cards that negate droll. Praying Kids don't care about droll. Dragon Link can play through droll and around it. Shittalls. Just the fact that you have Shitall cards in your deck. You can get drolled after Alistair resolves and still make a Macabre. It's crazy. Like, it's really nutty, honestly. It really is. Like, you can get drolled and then activate Shitall Fusion and send Ecclesia from your deck to your grave to summon a Construct, and then use your Nadir Servant to add your Ecclesia from your grave to your hand off of, you know, under the droll. So, like, this deck in particular, I feel it gets clapped by droll, probably the hardest, because it doesn't have a built-in main deck staple that has the archetype's name on it that actually helps you to beat droll. You can extend through droll and still end on a nice board, but it really does need to search a lot, like honestly a lot, to actually get going, especially when you're starting your combo off with an AI Mechu or a Psynet Mining to search out one of your main starters that actually need a search to get the engine going. But like, I'm not gonna say droll's just gonna be like the only reason that like this deck would struggle. I feel that another big choke point of this deck is like, if you are holding your Ash, not your Ash, your Valor or your Imperm for Dark Templar, that's like the best play. I've seen a lot of people Imperm this because they just don't want you to have the field spell. They'd rather stop you from going off than let you go off and then stop you at the biggest choke point of your deck. I think this deck is really scary because not a lot of decks can deal with the towers, especially when it has 4,000 to 5,000 attack. Some people have made this card with 6,000 attack. Like, that is just ridiculous. Axis Code Talker can't even beat that, you know, and that would be the only thing that would really come close. Other than that, I'm pretty sure... Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure this card can still be destroyed by battle, but they also have an Adagnister card that's in their grave that allows you to target a card on the field and negate its effects. So, Boros Sword wouldn't even help you to deal with this card. Honestly, this deck setting up this Towers card right here with having follow-ups and a negate in their grave and having that Reborn loop, I've seen this deck go off and it's honestly pretty broken. Like, this is a sleeper deck, but it's also, I feel, meta because of its representation. It's really crazy. Honestly, this deck is pretty crazy. I mean, it has amazing starters. It's very consistent. It has a great toolbox. I've seen the utility that its extra deck staples offer. I love this card. AI Contact is insane. To have a searchable card that says draw 3, and the cost is really not even high maintenance. It's really easy to see your field spell. It's pretty nutty. It is really, really nutty. And their Reborn card is also broken. Its Graveyard effect really baffles me. I mean, this deck is just really good. I can't talk too much about it because I don't really know everything. I haven't played it, but I've seen it in action, and it's really scary. I'm not going to lie. Like, this deck single-handedly makes me want to side Kaijus. We're going to talk about Virtual Worlds next. Virtual World is honestly, it's getting close to being goated. I mean, this deck is super-duper strong. I hate how inconsistent it can be. It really does annoy me how often I will brick with this deck. It grinds my gears the most. That this deck's biggest weakness is itself. I really want Konami to print another Virtual World name that has the effect to reveal it in your hand, targeting a card, and then, you know, send something from deck, special it, and do another action. If they just got one more, that would give them 15 Virtual World names, which would also give them another extender, which would really help to play through hand traps. Because this deck, it can be pretty fragile at times, and on top of it being pretty fragile, it also can be very, very bricky. But dude, it defies all odds, and sometimes it defies logic, because I'd be like, bro, I don't know why some people just play this deck and they never brick, and then a guy like me will literally draw like City, Quinlong, I'll draw a Nian Yan, Emergency Teleport, and then I'll draw like Chuchi, and I'll just be sitting here like, I can't even play. Like, I cannot play. I literally just cannot play, dude. Like, I can't do anything. It's crazy. Like, I've seen Virtual World players playing, and they're like always drawing City with Lulu, and they're drawing Gamma and Called By. It's just insane. Like, some people, I just feel like it's their destiny to be good with this deck, and some people like me will just brick more often than not. Like, obviously, when the deck is not bricking, this deck is gross, bro. I think Shinshin alone just bodies so many decks right now. Like, Shinshin bodies a lot of the decks on this list, honestly. Like, Shinshin by itself, but when you back Shinshin up with Chuchi, that's a nail in the coffin against Prank Kids. There's just no way to get out of it. Shadalls even struggle unless they can summon Ob Cologne chain blocking to negate it. Shadalls struggle. Dinosaurs struggle. Tri-Brigades not so much. Drivetrons struggle. They really do. You do not want your Drivetron names to go from the field to the Banish Zone. You want them to go from the field to the grave so that you can grind for your next turn. So it's honestly, Like Shin, the fact that the deck can make Invoked Kaliga, which is a super duper powerful card, it's super obnoxious. Like, should always boast a really great kit, should always have an amazing kit. Their extra deck adds to the utility that they offer and the variety of interruptions. These cards right here are some of your mainstays when you're playing Shaddolls. But the fact that Virtual Worlds can also make Kaliga is pretty insane, because Kaliga, backed with the Crystal Wing, a Chuchi, and a Shinshin, is just not a joke. It's just not a joke. Like, dude, you're getting a Macro Cosmos, you're getting a Monster Negate, you have a pop to protect your Kaliga from being attacked over, and you're literally ending turns if they don't have a Dark Roller or a Droplet. You're ending turns, dude. Like, this deck puts up some nutty boards. It has crazy consistency. When it gets going, I will say that every turn after its first is a lot more consistent, if that makes sense, because you'll always have Quinlongs in grave, you'll have Shinshin in grave, you're adding off of your in-phase off GG, you're looping your cards with cards like Chuche to pop, you're sometimes using Chuche to pop Chao Feng, or you're even using Vermilion Dragon Mech to pop itself, or Chuche to pop it, to just add your resources back. Constellar, Ptolemy, and 7, allowing you to add back your hand traps, and another Virtual World name. Like, your follow-ups in this deck are amazing. That's why I feel like every turn after your first turn is always going to be stronger. So the deck, if that makes sense, gets more consistent after it goes off and sets its engine up. And its engine also gives it an impeccable grind game as well. It's really solid. And also the fact that this deck can summon Zeus is just another added bonus. I think that Fortune Tune is probably one of the best rank 3s for going into Zeus with this deck. It's a very safe measure. But yeah, like, dude, Virtual World is pretty nasty, you guys. Like, honestly, like... And this deck is just increasing in popularity. It's such a great deck. It's super cool. It's very unique. It has its own playstyle, like Drivetrons, where it has a mechanic that restricts you from playing other generic cards, which is pretty cool because it is a non-link based deck. It is solely for Synchro summoning and XYZ summoning, and if you want a ritual summon, then do that. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about Amazements. So Amazements and Eldritch and also the Red Ice cards are going to be the last decks per se, because these are all more often than not used as engines than actual decks. They all offer a variety of consistency, resiliency, backup plans, contingencies, defensive cards, you name it, and also interruptions that just really can't be hand trapped at times. And it's always nice when you have a deck that can force hand traps to be used against you while still having cards that really can't be disrupted with hand traps. So trap decks have that strength where a lot of people are playing hand traps to counter combo decks and to counter meta decks, and then you run into a deck like Trap Tricks Amazement or Eldritch Amazement where it's like some of those interruptions are like Torrential Tributes and Solemn Strikes and Golden Land Forevers and, you know, like a walking Book of Moon, you know, a walking Crackdown. I mean, dude, like, these decks put up some pretty crazy interruptions, and what makes them more scary is that a lot of the conventional measures that people are using to counter decks cannot be used against trap cards. Like, trap cards are just so good in that sense that you really can't stop them, you know, like, outside of, like, maybe playing Feather Duster and Red Reboot in your main deck without side decking them, it's really hard to deal with trap cards because a lot of the times when you're up against trap-based decks, you really just have to play through their interruptions. You can't prevent the board from being made, you have to break the board when it's made. But when you have hand traps against Drivetrons, you can prevent them from making their board. But when you're up against like an Eldritch deck, you might get lucky and Ash their Sanguine, and they don't have access to Golden Lord in any other way. But other than that, dude, like, these decks are trap-based decks, and they're really good. I love Amazements. I like their gimmick. I like the art type. I like the artwork. I like that they have their own toolbox going on. They've got like a Paleozoic feel where they have searchable trap cards that give you an answer to certain scenarios that allow you to play out of those scenarios by having access to those cards. The same thing with Eldritch. I think this is a very boring deck. I'm not going to lie. I am not an Eldritch fan. I played this deck and then got rid of it while Golden Lord was still pretty expensive, and I'm glad I did because I'm just not an Eldritch player. I cannot force myself to play Eldritch. The only time I even like this deck is when I'm playing zombies in it with Unizombie, the Zombie World cards, Baylor Drock, Glow Up Bloom, actual zombies. Like, Eldritch Zombies is the only way I would really enjoy this deck and have fun with it. Other than that, it's like, it's boring to me, but at the same time, I can't take away from it. Eldritch has a really high ceiling. I know it's not as popular, but this deck is really powerful. Golden Lord, believe it or not, is a very skillful card. The way you can use him really puts this deck over the top because he has so many versatile options, being a consistent follow-up every turn, giving you pressure, and also a consistent spot removal every turn, having a really, really strong grind game, having a solid toolbox in the form of negates, disruptions, self-replacing cards, the fact that you can throw so many engines into this deck, like amazements, you can play Dragoon cards. It's really, really powerful, honestly. Like, Eldritch is really powerful. Amazement is really powerful. This deck claps so many different decks. Honestly, when you pair it against a lot of these decks, its disruptions are really, really good. You pair that with the generic cards that you can play, like Torrential, Ice Dragon's Prison, Solemn Strike, Crackdowns, Compulsory Evacuation Devices. I mean, I can go on. Different Dimension Ground. Dude, honestly, this deck is crazy. Amazement is such a good trap deck. The moment I saw this deck, I went and looked for it, and I started asking around to pick up the staples to build it, because I think this is going to be a really, really popular trend. It's going to be splashed in a lot of trap decks. I think Eldritch is the main deck people would want to splash it in. I think this deck also would do better in a deck like Trap Tricks, in a deck like, heck, I think this would even work out with, Subterrors. This is another trap deck that I think that this would work out in. You know, it's just really solid, honestly. Dragoon, I really don't have much to say about it. It's another win condition. A lot of decks, their ceiling just gets raised just by playing this card. I'm not really going to go helmet mode and play a Dragoon deck. I like to play a bit more skillful. I like more rewarding decks where you have to put a little extra work into your board. And it's just a lot more gratifying when you're winning. Not because you activated Red Ice Fusion and they didn't have an out, but you're winning because your deck had a complicated intricacy that had a higher learning curve than others, and you're winning because you knew how to play the deck, you took the time to master it, and on top of that, you know that other people cannot play your deck to that extent because they're not willing to. They want to play simple decks like Tri Brigade, you know, simple decks like Eldritch and Dragoon decks. A lot of the decks on this list are very, very skillful, by the way. So I will say this is a meta-analysis / my thoughts for the current format. I love the game, and I love the state that it's in. I have no complaints. I really like all these decks, and I like decks that I haven't mentioned on this list. Feel free to let me know how you feel. This video has been very long because I shared my thoughts on each and every archetype in this video. If you stuck around to the very end, I appreciate you very much, dude. I'm super grateful towards my subscribers because I love what you guys do for me, and I hope that you guys love what I do for you. That's perfect timing because I was getting ready to close the video. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, Lord Jesus Christ. Thy kingdom come, and thy will be done on earth just as it is in heaven. Please give us this day our daily bread, Lord Jesus, and please forgive us of our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, Father, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the glory, and the power forever. In the mighty name of Jesus I pray. Thank you, Father. Amen. All right, you guys. Deuces.